And again, right, and I've said this before, I have no personal vendetta. I don't personally care about either of these two gentlemen. I've never met them. I'm sure if we did, we'd have a beer, have a good time. If you take what I'm saying personally, that is your problem, not mine, right? And that's directly pointed at some people within CIG as well. Okay, so we're going to react to this, guys. This apparently is, apparently someone said that they're going to talk about fleet combat and the ideas of fleet combat. Is that correct? Okay. Well, let's see what they got.
Thing for the start of the show, it's actually seems to be reflective of this capital warfare experience that we're attempting to build here. So I want to ask you outright, how is capital warfare supposed to work? What are we building towards, and why should folks be excited?
I think the first thing to sort of approach is it shouldn't just be the same gameplay as small ships, just scaled up. It needs to be, we talked about progression, it should be.
Okay, so I do agree with this point, because as of right now, if you dogfight in a Gladius, you can use all the exact same principles to dogfight a Polaris with another Polaris. You can literally get into rate fights and all that stuff. So as of right now, large ships are basically just really slow, really boring fighters.
A progression of gameplay, so you can't just turn up, lob 50 torpedoes at a ship, press the I win button and go on. You've got to.
Okay, well, this also, sorry, I'm going to say this. This is coming from the same guy that I don't know, a couple months ago released the Firebird.
In terms of who is the Firebird for, just like anyone who enjoys combat, this is a ship for you, especially if you prefer to sort of not engage direct in dogfights and sort of lurk on the periphery of combat and help chip away at the targets. So that's the Saber Firebird.
And literally created the ship that does exactly what he just said there. So the Firebird shows up, presses the I win button with 24 size 3 EM torpedo missiles, and okay.
Remove those defenses layer by layer. So capital ships have multiple defense. Obviously, they have turrets on them for shooting ships. They also have PDCs
turrets that are not effective.
For disabling closer targets such as missiles and torpedoes.
PDCs which now have basically rendered all missiles useless, which is actually quite funny. At first, when PDCs came out, they basically didn't work at all. And now they've been tuned into a place where essentially they shoot down every incoming torpedo. And unless you have an exorbitant amount of incoming torpedoes, the PDCs will just block everything. To the point where if two Polarises fight each other, it's like watching old people make love, because neither of them can land a shot. Both of them are sitting staring at each other, and it's a very slow, arduous process. So we got to get to a better place than that.
And then they have physicalized shield emitters, which is what you saw in the demo where Cal Mason sort of kites a Vandal ship into it. So you need to take all those things out in progression to stand a chance against a capital ship.
So it's not just a brute force thing. I know a lot of folks are imagining just coming in with an A2 and dropping a MOAB.
Right. So they're talking about a tiered level of response. So you don't go straight to doing hull damage to the enemy ship. You have to go through the layers of defense. You got to get through the flak screen, or, you know, if you look at a tactical battlefield, you have a tiered layer of response, right? So when I was in the military, and fighting in Afghanistan, there would be levels of engagement essentially. So what you would have is stage one, you engage enemies at this location with these types of weapons. And as you get closer to whatever operation you were doing or whatever you were protecting or whatever the case may be, the weapons and tools and defense strategies would change depending on the proximity of the target. So obviously, for engaging long-range targets, you'd be using jets, drones, that kind of stuff. And as it came closer, you'd switch to artillery, and then closer your tanks and blah, 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 right? And this strategy has been in the military as long as I can remember and as long as back as history. So to finally put it in StarCitizen where you have a tiered layer going through these different, I guess you could say, screens, first the fighter screen, then the flak screen, then this, then that, until finally you're at the, it's like a castle siege, right? Because right now, you just cut through all that stuff and just go straight to applying damage to the ship. And we all know that multi-crew ships are not able to defend themselves because there is no layer of, I guess you could say, threat mitigation from any of their weapon systems. We don't have flaks. We have missiles that are largely either overpowered or not effective at all. The only way to project your threat zone, I guess you could say, is to have fighters on board your ship to project your damage out into the tactical battle space. So hopefully we get some much needed fundamental, and I say this in all sincerity, fundamental overhaul of the theory behind how StarCitizen is designing and building their ships. Because right now there's a critical design flaw which needs to get addressed with how all these ships mesh together. If you don't know what that design flaw is, I implore you to watch my YouTube video called the geometric issue with combat. It's on my YouTube channel. You guys, obviously the folks that are watching the stream, you can watch it now. You've seen it. So, but for anybody who watches this video in the future, watch that video because it'll explain it in detail.
To be solved here. Is that how you would say it, Rich?
Ultimately, capital ship warfare should be a puzzle that you have to figure out. If you actually watch that cinematic for the squadron demo, you'll notice that one of the lines is, "Hey Cal, I don't think your weapons are large enough to be able to take out that shield emitter," or that shield Jenny, as they say. And he
Sorry. Sometimes I giggle when they use cinematic references to justify tactical things. But I think what's being said here is they want to move to a place where the size of your weapon dictates what you are allowed and not allowed to engage. So for example, obviously your size 3 or 4 guns are not going to do a substantial amount of damage to the hull of a king ship, right? The thing is, we kind of already have that in StarCitizen now. An Idris has a couple million hit points, and if you surround it with 15 fighters, you can bang away at the end of at that hull until eventually you strip it away and you've just killed the ship entirely from just draining its health pool. But again, unless we figure out the geometric problem, even if your guns are small, it's either they do damage, even if it's a little bit of damage. If your guns do damage, then the issue with the combat system now is it'll always end in death for the multi-crew ship, even if they're small guns. If they don't do damage, in the sense that I can shoot the side of a Idris with size 3 or 4 guns and it does 0 damage, then it becomes a game of, well, now you have to shoot these specific points on the ship. Now, Star Wars Squadrons had a really, in my opinion, the gold standard when it comes to attacking a large vessel. In Star Wars Squadrons, you have the shields, and the only way you bring those shields down is by putting a lot of pressure on that enemy capital ship, whether it's through ion torpedoes, weapon systems specifically designed at taking shields down. Once the shields were down, then you could fly in and start engaging subsystems on the Star Destroyer or the MC-75, which could be something very easily done in StarCitizen. First job is to bring big enough guns to drop the shields, and then once the shields are down, then the fighters can start contributing to the overall status of the battle by picking out shield generators, by picking out PDCs. And then Squadrons had a really amazing mechanic where if you were to do damage to the larger vessel, there are these fracture points, like these hull breaches that would actually show up. And if you targeted those hull breaches, you kind of see it by like this ion energy kind of like cracking out of the ship. The fighters could target those and shoot at those weak spots that would kind of pop up throughout the ship as the ship's hull was slowly drained, right? So it's a really cool thing. I think StarCitizen should seriously consider adding something like that in, where actually placing, and I say this, again with all sincerity, placing your shots strategically and rewarding players that are picking their strategic positions to shoot and engage is gonna give them the result of a lower time to kill. So if you do it correctly and you're picking those points correctly, it should result in a lower time to kill, something they want to consider.
He says, you may be right. And that is actually true. You shouldn't be able to turn up with small ships and small caliber weapons against a huge capital ship. And it's what we touched on in part 1 in terms of the physicalized nature of the damage. If I fire a small caliber pistol at tank, it's not going to do much.
Okay, here's my rebuttal to that. Are you going to make fighter and fighter-based weapons the pistol versus the tank? Because if that's the case, don't forget, the Mark II Hornet has size 4 wing guns. Okay? The turret main batteries on a Polaris are size 4 hardpoints. So if you make size 4 guns pea shooters, then you also make a lot of the other capital ships pea shooters against other capital ships. So they got to be careful with that, because he's living in this world where it's like, I understand if you have size 1 guns, yeah, you're not going to be doing a substantial amount of really effective damage, versus a larger vessel. But in my personal opinion, they still have to fix the geometric issue, because whether you're shooting size 1 guns or size 2 guns, as long as your gun does damage, then the fighters can just stay outside of the range of the enemy ship and just keep hitting it, over time. Maybe it takes 20 minutes, but they would have to make size 4 guns and below pea shooters versus larger vessels, which means they'd have to make it so that larger vessels would have a minimum of size 5 or above. And again, you get into the whole problem of, I guess you could say like exponential size increases and all that stuff. And it's just, it's not going to work. It's not going to work the way they expect it to, because unless they fix the issue where multi-crew ships can apply damage to fighters, if fighters can apply damage to the multi-crew ship and the multi-crew ships can't apply damage back to the fighters, then the size changing and all that stuff, and it's not going to have the effect you want. You have to fix the geometric issue first before you start messing with all these different sizes.
The reason why we have like an Ares or a Retaliator is to allow you to soften up the capital ship shield, so that you can actually then get access to the shield emitters.
Okay, this is exactly what I was talking about, right? So it looks like they're kind of going to the point where let's drop the shields first by bringing big guns, by oversaturating the damage on the bigger ship. So this makes it so that small groups of fighters don't have a lot of sustained damage. Fighters have high burst damage, but in order to drop the shields on a big ship, you need big guns that fire consistently. That's how you drop shields. Because if you're constantly waiting for your guns to recharge on something like a Hornet, your damage sustained is going to be lower than a ship gun that just shoots and just doesn't stop, right? That's just something people need to understand, which is good.
And the PDCs and the weapons that are actually keeping your fighters away. And the way that the shield faces work is that they're underpinned by physicalized shield emitters, which are then connected to the core shield generator, or in large capital ships might have multiple shield generators. So ultimately, your first foray should be like, okay, which shield face are we going to try and soften up and dampen to weaken it, to be able to then send in our a squad of fighters to be able to target certain shield emitters, another squad to be able to target the PDCs, or in case if you're taking a much larger ship, like a Javelin size, which will have flaks. So you'll have to basically figure out, okay, this group or this squadron will take on this squadron will take on this, and this is where the hologlobe comes in terms of you're the admiral of the fleet, you're going, okay, right, I'm assigning you this target, and then...
Okay, so now they're talking about what's called a CNC, right? Or command and control. And, in the military, like in Afghanistan, what we would have is we'd have the TOC, right? And the TOC is the command center that would have access to every unit. It'd be able to see through everyone's eyes, essentially, and assign orders. At the moment right now, we do not have an active TOC. We don't have a centralized system to assign orders to groups. We have no tactical capability as of right now, right? Obviously, we're in development. Before everyone freaks out and goes, well, eventually what? It's in development. I know. We've been in for 10 years. I get it. But in order for what he's talking about to be successful, we have to have a very basic interface. And in my personal opinion, the HUD elements that need to be done correctly are what is being targeted clearly and where that is on the ship clearly, right? So if I give you a point on a Polaris, I say, I want you to attack the shield generator. The physical location of that shield generator should have an icon that pops up for the people that I've assigned that target to and have it be there. Because otherwise you're going to be constantly looking around and it's just, it should just pop up. Like, shoot that point right there. Awesome. Gotcha, Captain.
If you're a fighter, you're going to then receive markers, and then obviously you're going to be connected to be able to say, okay, go now, I want you to attack now.
Right, but the markers have to be on the locations, in my opinion, where the actual target is. Not just, what I don't want them to do is have a little indicator that pops up over top of the ship and it just says, target the shield generator. It's like, okay, well, where is it? I understand that, as you play the game, because again, what you want to do is reduce knowledge ceilings and increase skill ceilings. So when I give you a target, right, and I target a specific ship component and I feed that information to my fighter screen should automatically know exactly where on that ship I'm telling them to shoot, right? Because for a new pilot, for a rookie, if you say target the Polaris' shields, he's going to look at you and go like, where the F is that? They won't know, and you want to reduce those things. You want to make it pretty simple. Keep it simple, stupid is the whole thing. It's like you're a brand new player. Your FC says target the shields, and you see a little indicator pop up on the Polaris. You're just like, okay, monkey pull stick, fire at location. Everyone do good. Like, that's what you want, right? You want to give people an opportunity to know what's going on, and keep those knowledge ceilings reduced. And keep the skill. Look, the actual application of getting close to the ship, applying damage, and actually getting like hits on target, that's the skill-based thing that needs to happen. We don't need to bog people down with like memorizing locations on every specific ship. Like, it's a game, guys. Like, let's keep it simple, right?
Because you need to have a coordinated alpha strike. If you just drip feed your damage over time, the capital ship will just be able to absorb it. So this is where you need to be able to go, okay, what's my tactics, what's my high level strategy? And then once you've taken out the PDCs and you've taken down a shield phase, that's when you've got essentially two options. One option will be to board, so you'll be able to then use our hacking gameplay, and then obviously you'll have to fight your way through to the bridge to be able to take over it. Or the other side is then you just, if your mission is to just destroy this ship, if you've taken down those layers of defenses like John says, that's where you then send in the torpedoes. So capital ship gameplay is again planned to utilize all the different roles of the different ships that we've made over the years.
Okay, so it seems like they're still on the trajectory of torpedoes being, I basically have to win the fights, and this is the problem I get in with these guys. They're saying you have to win the fight before you're allowed to use torpedoes. This is my problem, and let me explain what I'm talking about here. When I say you have to win the fight, if you've dropped the enemy ship's shields and you've destroyed their defensive systems, you've dethroned, declawed, and defanged the enemy ship. At this point, it's a floating pile of steel that can't defend itself, can't shoot back, is not effective against your ships or your fighters. That is the end game. Like, the ship has lost the battle, right? At that point, you can bring torpedoes in and just kill, right? I don't think that's the best way to go about it. I mean, think about it. If you're holding on to torpedoes that are basically just a finisher, there's no skill check on using those torpedoes. There's no operations for the missile manager on board something like a Polaris to actually have something to contribute to the fight. It's not like I can fire a torpedo and then TVI or tether guide that that torpedo to the target. That would be something cool, right? Like, if I launch a torpedo from the console and I'm allowed to take control of that torpedo manually, now it comes down to turrets actually identifying that target. Hopefully the PDCs. I think the PDCs right now are a little bit ridiculous. In terms of how effective they are. But I would like to see more, I guess you could say, hands-on gameplay with the torpedoes. Like, just out of curiosity, is anybody else feeling the same way I feel about torpedoes? Because torpedoes should be something, because right now the torpedoes are basically a very low skill ceiling, very basic, not a lot of thought put into it, just kind of like press green button, you know. And I don't want that to be a thing. I want torpedoes to actually be more skill based. You know, I should be able to launch a torpedo from really far away and then manually guide that torpedo in and have options to turn the torpedo's signature off. So if I guide it, I pick an angle and then I turn the torpedo's booster off, that signature should go down. It should be harder for people to see the torpedo coming in. Like, those kinds of things really matter. It adds a layer of strategy, position, timing that is going to be very reminiscent of something like a submarine type gameplay. If I'm launching torpedoes from long range and then I'm guiding them in manually and then I turn the torpedo's power off, like, you can have cool stuff in place where you can't just reactivate the torpedo. Like, you've basically decided to pick the angle and you've committed to that angle. So those kinds of things, in my opinion, are really cool. You know, it gives time for the torpedo to accelerate up to a really, really high speed. So shooting torpedoes from longer ranges to give them time to speed up, pick an angle, and then go silent running and have them just scream in super fast to the target is going to be something that is more skill-based for the torpedo operator, only firing one at a time because you can only control one at a time. So you're deciding, do I go volley fire and just deluge missiles, or do I pick my shots one at a time? Like, these kinds of things are mechanics, in my opinion, that CIG is woefully missing out on, because it's going to add a layer of, you know, they talk about wanting something different for multi-crew ships, and they don't talk about changing the dynamics of how that system works. We have a Polaris that flies just like a Gladius. It's just much larger. There is no geometrical difference between a Polaris shooting torpedoes and a Gladius firing dumbfire missiles. All that's different is that the Gladius turns faster and is smaller, and the torpedoes or the missiles that fire from the Gladius are coming out at faster rates. So if you want to add a different feel to multi-crew gameplay, you have to have completely different types of weapon systems with completely different types of strategies to completely change the tactical battle space. So there's a reason to use these different types of weapon systems. It would also, in my personal opinion, add a layer of multi-crew gameplay that would be more fun, because you want large standoff distances. You want large distances between multi-crew ships, because if you're right beside each other, you limit so many of your gameplay options. You limit signature options. You limit basically dodge timing. So if you are running those kinds of torpedo systems, you're going to change your dodge timings, right? If you're at much longer distances, you now have time. You have time to decide how you want to, associate with that threat. If you're sending all your fighters to deal with those incoming torpedoes and you're getting shot from another direction, those fighters don't have time to hit the brakes, turn around, come back, and start going after torpedoes coming from a different angle. All these things matter, and this is what I get frustrated with CIGs. They don't seem to get that. They're just talking to us about doing the capital ship warfare exactly the same how the fighters are, and then they're going to scratch their head a year from now and they're going to wonder why people aren't being successful with multi-crew ships, because the strategy is identical. It's just your ship is physically larger,
Years, and it should be a significant challenge to be able to take out one of those larger ships.
Because right now it is so flippin' easy to kill a multi-crew ship. Like, they want it to be more difficult, but they don't change the fundamental mechanics of how multi-crew ships work compared to fighters. And then, because of right now, smaller is much better. The smaller you are in Star Citizen right now, and in fact, the smaller you've been throughout Star Citizen's entire history of combat, small is better. Small is more effective. It's no surprise that the Fury is still the top dog.
Let's paint a picture here. What's one capital engagement supposed to be?
Well, let's just use save the Idris event,
okay.
If you want to go through.
Yeah, so realistically, when you're coming up to it, first thing you should be doing is scanning it so you know what you're going up against. You want to do a scan on it to work out where are its shield emitters, so then you can then plan, like, we want to take the right-hand side shield emitter down. So we'll mark that as a target give it to that group.
You might be sending in a terrapin or a forward ship to be able to get scan data that then relays that back to
Okay, so they're still talking about a networking system,
you on the Polaris and your hologlobe to be able to go, okay,
which is only going to make, so for squadrons like Avenger Squadron, we already train, we know where all these components are. There's no need for us to have an interlinked system. It just makes our jobs a little easier. So they're talking about all these just interlinking systems, but at the end of the day, do you have fighters? Do they know where to shoot? And are they shooting at that spot at the right time?
okay, now I've got some information to work with. How do I then approach it from there?
Yeah, because one capital versus another capital is probably the worst scenario. If it's literally two single capital, they need their fleets to.
So this is my problem. Like, so that right there is, in my personal opinion, not a fun solution for multi-crew ships. You're telling me that two Polarises fighting each other is going to be like watching paint dry. Just a show of hands. Who think that's going to be a lot of fun? Because I can tell you right now, that's not going to be a lot of fun. If you are hamstrung to the fact that you absolutely positively cannot complete a kill because you don't have fighters on the grid, to me, that is frustrating. If battles cannot resolve themselves without fighters, that is a fundamental problem with the game system, not people's skill sets, you know? Because if you have a Star Destroyer and a Mon-Cal fighter frigate side by side, there's going to be a resolution to that fight. You know, if you put for all my Star Trek folks out there, if you put the Enterprise E versus a Romulan Warbird side by side, they're going to resolve that fight quite quickly. You know, if you put Stargate fans, if you put a Goa'uld mothership versus whatever the Phoenix is, I can't remember, the human big ship. All these big ships, they're going to resolve their fights quickly. You put a base star and Battlestar Galactica against each other, they're going to resolve that fight, you know? Yeah, exactly, they're emo. So the fact that they're actually designing, and these, don't forget guys, these are the two designers for Star Citizen. They want two multi-crew ships, from how it sounds, to basically not be able to finish each other off because like they don't have fighters on grid. I'm sorry, that is not the way forward. No, it's not going to work. People are not going to enjoy that.
Reach their maximum potential, so you should be bringing these support ships with you. So yeah, you've scanned it, you've identified your point where you're going to be attacked.
Let's read. I want to make sure I got that right.
From there.
Yeah, because one capital versus another capital is probably the worst scenario. If it's literally
one cap versus one cap is the worst scenario. How is that the worst scenario? I see, that's
two single cap. They need their fleets to reach their maximum potential. So you
of course they're gonna, yeah, right. So augmenting with fighters is gonna allow your fleet to go to the maximum potential. I'm not saying that that's not the case. I agree with that. But two cap ships side by side fighting each other, that shouldn't be the worst scenario. Like, that should be a good scenario. It shouldn't be the optimal scenario, and that's the difference. It shouldn't be optimal, but it's not the worst scenario. You know, like these fights are going to have to resolve themselves in a fun way. Otherwise, we're going to never get multi-crew ships in a place that's fun.
You should be bringing these support ships with you.
Like a support ship, like a Javelin with a fighter screen, is going to kill a Javelin that's by itself. Nobody's going to debate that, because the fighter screen is going to take out PDCs and they're going to take out turrets and yada yada yada. So we all agree that that's the case.
So yeah, you've scanned it, you've identified your point where you're going to be attacking. You assign a group of fighters from your ship or from your fleet, take away their fighters, try and attack their turrets, and then you run another group to sort of bring down those shield emitters. The majority of them will be under the skin, so you need to scan to find their locations and then target them specifically.
Using ADS.
Damage penetration.
So, yeah, I guess that's the route they want to take. You know, they always talk about cinematics, and they always talk about, you know, like the way they're trying to say it is like, you know, when the shields are down, you've got to, you have to go. And I say you have to go into precision mode so that you can actually see the outline of the target inside the ship. I wish that wasn't the case. I like the idea that if the shields are down, like on a Star Destroyer, you've got the 2 shield balls on the top of the ship. They're clear as day, you know? I wish it was more like that, where the components would actually be externalized sections of the ship that you could visually pick up and see. Not only would that be much more cinematic, but it would also just be much more simple, right? Again, right? It's just keep it simple, but what do you know, right?
Precision targeting, as we should say.
So again, things like
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of precision targeting. I think a lot of folks aren't either.
the 2 starfighters are great for this role. So you have the Inferno, the Ballista.
The Inferno and the Ion are actually not good for this role because their overall DPS and current tuning right now is not very good.
Will penetrate
You actually do more DPS in a Mark II Hornet than you do an Ion.
through, damage it. The Iron, great to bring the shields down to allow those ballistics to go even easier to the hull.
You've got to take out PDCs as well.
Yep, PDCs as well.
So the PDCs won't just attack missiles and torpedoes, they will also attack other small objects. And so we need to make sure that you've created a safe zone or an entryway and you're punched through those defenses, and then you've got your options of either boarding or destruction, depending on what your objective is.
Sounds like something ideal for a light fighter, just taking down the PDCs.
Absolutely, like light fighter, heavy fighter, but you won't just be able to penetrate the shields on a capital ship because they'd be so heavy. So you'll need to use relevant weapon rate. That's where really the capital ship main weapons come in, because they're the ones that are actually doing the main damage on the shields to be able to soften it up, to allow their fighters and support ships. You can't just roll up and just try and out DPS it. I mean, you can, but you're rolling the dice. You know, is my capital ship going to be better than your capital ship? Am I going to be able to maneuver it well? Because that's the one thing to discuss about shield emitters. Right now, you have a shield generator that kind of creates a bubble, and we say, okay, this is this face, right face, left wing. And if you look at the wing, if you shoot the wing from the front and it hits the front of the wing, we just automatically work out like, okay, is that the front face or is that the left face?
Yeah, he's talking about sectionalizing the shields into different spots. I'll be honest, guys, I'm not a big fan of sectionalized shields. I'm not a big fan of it. I would much rather have a bubble shield for any capital ship, and have timing, and I say this again, timing based shield hardening. I'd rather have them harden sections of the shields and just keep all shields, either the shields are up or they're down, you know? Burning a hole through a section of a ship, like, it doesn't, in 6 Degrees of Freedom, it doesn't have the same effect on the fight that I guess you could say maybe they envisioned, just because there's so many other angles that you can move against on. Whereas like in naval combat, it's mostly 2-dimensional. You're on the ocean. You know, if you had 4-way shielding, it's like, and I protect my starboard or port side. It's a totally different animal, because in space I could just go above and change that angle, and now, you know, as if I moved around them. Yeah, and we also don't have a top or bottom shield, so it's this weird, like if you shoot at the center, you actually hit all 4 shield facings. So I would much rather see capital ships go to a bubble shield. And to be honest, all ships should have bubble shields, because the sectional shielding, I don't know, if you're going to do sectional shielding, again, Star Wars Squadrons did it better, is have a bi-directional shielding where you take a sphere and you cut it in half, and one section is the front, one section is the back, and you basically choose double front, double rear, because you're either approaching a target or you're disengaging a target. Because to have all these different shield faces, I just think it overcomplicates a very simple strategy of gameplay that doesn't need to be overcomplicated. And it takes away our options, I feel like, because if I drill a shield face, like, I don't know, it just, with bigger ships, you're not going to be able to protect that shield face. Like, fighters are going to drill that hole, and that's just going to be it, you know? So.
And for the player, that's not super obvious. So you want to be in understanding like, okay, well, the shield actually hugs the ship. So we need to know, well, actually, that's the left face. So you as a player can go, right, that's what we're targeting, that's what we need to bring down. Because otherwise, these shield generators are so powerful on capital ships, they'll just be coming back.
Yeah, I also don't see the reason why, like, we should have shielding that conforms to the geometry of the ship. Why don't we have a bubble shield that protects the ship in a bubble? And if a fighter pilot is really good, he can actually fly under that shield, apply damage, and then fly out. Because what's happening is it does two things. One, if you have, because you got to think about it as a holistic experience for people in turrets and in fighters. I have to take a big risk flying close to get underneath that shield, and when I'm underneath, then I can apply damage to a system. Like obviously this would be for the biggest ships, right? Like if you have a Polaris, like the shield should be quite large, you know. It would also, in my personal opinion, allow us physical space to be able to deflect incoming collisions. I think there's a problem right now with a lot of capital ship warfare, and that is people just go kamikaze all the time. So we need to reduce kamikaze opportunities, because everyone who's a salty, you know, D-bag is just going to be like, well, I'm losing this fight, so if I'm going to die, I'm going to take them with me. And they're just going to kamikaze into the other guy, and fights are not going to resolve themselves. It's just going to be a real pain in the butt, right? If one ship's shields are up, you got to think about this. It's like a gravimetric shield that surrounds the ship. So if another large vessel gets close and has high velocity, the shield should deflect that incoming ship. So instead of getting T-boned, it just gets deflected like this, so the ship passes by. You know, and if you have larger shields, you actually have time to deflect that. It's not going to make the ship look so ridiculous, where like two ships bump into each other and then they kind of like fly away, and then they bump into each other and then they fly away. You know, we need physically large bubble shields that encompass the multi-crew ship so that fighters can fly under them, and allow turrets to actually be able to shoot those fighters when they're coming in for those runs. So there's communication between the pilot of the multi-crew ship and its gunners. Hey guys, I got a fighter coming in on the starboard side. Get it off me. It's like right there. You know, it adds a layer of skill for the pilot to be able to execute that. Risk and also reward for a smart turret team to be able to identify those threats quickly, spin, and shoot that guy. It also brings them into a physical range that turrets are actually effective, because right now we all know the geometric issue with the game's combat is it's not looking good.
Throughout all of that, we've sort of assumed that the target ship is just sat there.
Absolutely.
But you have the opposite, like you're on the ship.
The
You can
defender is
see-
spinning the ship
Yeah.
around, trying to put trying to put their stronger side towards the attacker.
You're seeing all this
Exactly.
fire coming to this side, so you're now trying to maneuver yourself to avoid that. Counter players, they're trying to take out your thrusters to stop you maneuvering, so it is a big puzzle.
So shields
It's not a big puzzle because the fighters just drill through a shield.
down, PDC is cleared. And that's where this can go from a ship versus ship to a combined arms thing,
Absolutely.
which is really what's most exciting to me. This idea that you now have to send troops over to breach, you know, and board the ship.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also you might have to defend against being boarded. So if you're going up against another player, and they've got a Polaris and you've got a Polaris, or you know, when we add the Idris into the game and you're coming up, then you're going to have different mixes of gameplay when you're fighting over whether it's resources, station warfare, all the things that we've discussed previously. We've not really got to end game yet. Yeah. We're still really at mid game. End game is fleet battles and being able to utilize
Yeah, we need service for that, guys.
these large ships, and then that comes back to TTD if you do lose, or you need salvage, or you need repair, or you need to rescue the people that are still on the ship. These types of battles, these types of combat add and are underpinned by so much more gameplay than what we've just discussed today.
Yeah, like the flight model.
And I think
All those things that he just talked about, every single one of them relies on the flight model.
that's where it starts to connect the loops.
Yeah. Now he's starting to get it.
All right, so that's just a little bit about capital warfare. Thank you so much for sharing. Our viewers are going to be incredibly excited about that. The player.
Yeah, excited is the understatement there, Jared. So all in all, and again, right, and I've said this before, I have no personal vendetta. I don't personally care about either of these two gentlemen. I never met them. I'm sure if we did, we'd have a beer, have a good time. If you take what I'm saying personally, that is your problem, not mine, right? And that's directly pointed at some people within CIG as well. So my opinion as of how they've explained the combat for capital ship warfare is it's not going to be good. It's just not going to be. There's too many problems with the flight model. There's too many problems with the way that they're concepting this. And unless they start fixing the geometric issue, which has plagued the game since day one, it's not going to change the dynamic. And multi-crew ships are basically just going to be large castles to take that aren't really going to be a threat. You know, they're not a threat now. I mean, if you guys come and watch the stream, obviously you folks are watching now, we kill Polarises like one after the other, right? And we just do it in small fighter groups. And people are obviously going to say, well, in Maelstrom it's going to be different. Okay, well then we'll just bring, the necessary tools for the job, and we'll just kill multi-crew ships one after the other. They're not really a threat, because the multi-crew ships are never really able to apply damage to any of the fighter classes, including the Ion. The only time a ship of big size is going to apply damage to anything else is either a ship of the same size or larger. We really have an inversion right now in StarCitizen where it's the smaller ships that are higher on the food chain and the bigger ships are lower on the food chain, which is a complete inversion how you would expect it. You'd actually expect the Javelin to be at the top of the food chain and the smaller ships to be more difficult, to kind of bridge that gap. But as of right now, if you bring 5 Furies that know what they're doing, there's not a ship in the game that can stop that. There's not a multi-crew ship in the game that can stop that. The only way to stop those Furies is to bring fighters of your own to kill them, and then you get to do what the Furies were doing to the other multi-crew ships. So if you bring Gladiuses and all that stuff, right? Anyway, there you go, folks. That's my point of view on it. If you agree, great. If you don't agree, also great. This is why we have the discussion. But I just want people to understand where I'm coming from, because as an experienced player who's been playing this game for a long time, there's a lot of holes in the way they're concepting this, and it's only going to end in frustration for a lot of people. And eventually, a year from now, when CIG starts to realize that they made these big mistakes and they should have switched more to like the suggestions I'm talking about with the player guided torpedoes, the larger bubble shields, the reduction in ramming, all these kinds of gameplay mechanics that have to make its way in the game. If you don't do these things or somehow tackle these issues, you're going to have a fighter dominated food chain where the small stuffs are always killing the big stuff. And people are going to spend money on their thousands and thousands of dollars worth of ships, which are subsequently going to get murderized, and embarrassed by, a bunch of folks. What I can only describe as Mad Max type Honda Civics with rusted out bars TIG welded to the front of their windscreens. So anyway, let's get to now after I was saying all that stuff, let's get to killing Polarises.